I'm a 29-year-old female, and my partner is a 23-year-old female. We're back in her hometown visiting her family for about a week. It's a very small, isolated town in the middle of nowhere, and basically in the middle of the woods. While we were here, she wanted to meet up with an old high school friend who still lives in the area, Kyle. We met Kyle at the beach, and right away, he's acting super weird, making jokes that are highly inappropriate and unwelcome. Obviously, we're unfortunately used to this stuff to a certain extent, but coming from someone who was supposed to be her good friend, it was extra annoying. So me and my girlfriend were shooting each other panicked looks the whole time. Once he's out of earshot for a second, she says that she's sorry and that she's never seen him be like this before, and that we can make an excuse to leave. When he comes back, we tell him we want to get dinner at a local bar, but he just asks to join us. We felt awkward and ended up saying yes. He says he doesn't know quite how to get there, so he followed us. We get there, order drinks and food, and then head out to the patio with the drinks. He makes a few more gross comments, but is generally being way more cool than normal than he was at the beach. We're smoking on the patio and just chilling. The food arrives, we finish it quicker, and here's where it gets really messed up. Halfway through my first drink, I'm feeling really tired, which makes sense as I've had a long day. I give my girlfriend that signal that I want to go, and she makes an excuse that we need to leave. He keeps trying to get us to come to his house. I've got some really good stuff, and you can meet my cats, blah blah blah. He's being really pushy. We keep saying no and making excuses, and that we need to check on her grandpa. So finally we get into the car and say goodnight. We've parked next to each other and walked up to the cars together while saying our goodbyes. When we get in the car, my girlfriend informs me that she wants to stay at the bar, but fake it like we're leaving because she doesn't want to chill with him anymore, understandably. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him to leave first when he signals for us to roll down the window. We do. He says his GPS is being funny, and can we lead him to the main road? To be fair, we were in the middle of nowhere, so this didn't seem too outlandish, so obviously staying behind the bar was out at that point. In the car, we're talking about just how pushy he was being, and how she admits she feels strange driving right back to her grandparents' house. So we should drive into town until we lose him. He's behind us for a long time, even way after he should have gotten off his exit. We think it's weird, but aren't really sure what to do. Finally, we get onto a 2-lane road and he pulls up next to us and is waving a phone, which is clearly my girlfriend's phone, in the window. We pull over, he gives her the phone back, chats for a few seconds and then leaves in a hurry. Here's the part that makes my skin crawl. We knew she had her phone. I saw her put it in her fanny pack on the table along with my phone and a few other things a few minutes before we left the bar, as we were preparing to leave. She didn't take it back out. There's literally no way she could have left it at the bar. More importantly, he got into his car and left the bar at the same time as us, meaning he had to have already had the phone when we were leaving. It's not like we left the bar in the first place and he saw it was left on the table or something. He literally had to have been walking to the cars with us and calmly saying goodnight with the phone already in his possession. Now the kicker. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend has tasted a very weird bitter taste in her straw at the bar and was already suspicious, especially with how he'd been acting. This is why she wanted us to stay at the bar to get away from him and stay in public where she felt safer. So when he walked up to the car to return her cell phone, she very casually and deliberately flashed the knife that she kept for protection in her jacket. I didn't know at the time that she had done this, so that's why he had left so quickly. Obviously, I was annoyed with her for not telling me her suspicions sooner, but she just didn't want me to panic. I'm really shaken up. A few things are clear though. He stole my girlfriend's phone, and it seems like he did that so we would be forced to pull over on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. He also ended the conversation and left when my girlfriend flashed her weapon, and they've been good friends for almost 10 years. If he wasn't planning on doing something malicious, I feel he would have acted confused about the weapon, or said something like, "Lol, what are you doing?" But instead he booked it, which tells me he knew exactly what she was doing, reacting to a threat and preparing to protect herself and me. Finally, he probably spiked our drinks. My girlfriend noticed a weird taste in her straw right away and chose not to finish her drink. I half finished mine and felt very tired. I don't know how he managed to nab the phone without us knowing or noticing. It doesn't really make sense, but he did. Me and my girlfriend both remember her putting it in the fanny pack perfectly. We also have no idea how he could have spiked our drinks unless he was working with the bartender, but we were the ones who suggested that bar. I don't know exactly how he did it, but I think I know why. And for that reason, my girlfriend's now ex-friend who made creepy comments and probably tried to spike our drinks and stole her phone in order to get us alone on a dark road. Let's not meet again. At the time of this story, my family and I lived in Northeast Ohio. Most of our extended family on my father's side lived in Central Florida. So for the Christmas holidays, we would go and spend time with my grandparents and aunts and uncles. At the time, I was 6 years old. My brother Russ was 4, and my brother Chase was 2, and my brother Braden was 4 months. The trip down to Florida was uneventful. We did not come across any car wrecks or anything of interest. It was a very long drive though, especially with a 4-month-old baby. We drove in a red minivan that was loaded down to clothes and toys. You can imagine all the toys that we bought to celebrate our Christmas, along with what our grandparents were going to give us. Christmas with my grandparents was fantastic. We had aunts and uncles and lots of cousins. We ate, talked and played. There were tons of toys and new outfits. When the time came to go home, we had twice as much as what we came with. My mum had to put our clothes in trash bags and pack them underneath the seats and on the floorboards of the van. When we climbed in, we were walking on top of our toys and clothes, and we didn't mind it much being kids. We started our long trip back. After we went north for a while, and were in a different state, my dad realized that we were losing gas incredibly fast. We had to stop several times to fill up, and that's when my dad decided to stop at a mechanic's. We had spent all of our extra money in Florida, and my parents had not planned on having to stop to get the van serviced. It was kind of neat and kind of annoying at the same time to be stuck in this mechanic shop, not having the money for a hotel or even a motel. So we spent the night in the car, while it was up in the lift that the mechanics worked underneath it. Loud, noisy, and not smelling very good. After lots of money and being stuck in a mechanic shop for a while, my dad decided that enough was enough and we were going to leave. A lot of improvements had been made to the van, but the main problem was not fixed. Back on the road, we finally made it to the Smoky Mountains. It was beautiful considering that it was Christmas time, and there was pristine snow on both sides of the highway. It was very early morning, and we had just woken up. We were in pajamas and odds and ends of clothing. My brother Chase was wearing his coat and a pair of sweatpants. Ross only wore a pair of sweatpants, and I had a pair of corduroy pants, socks and a t-shirt. My mum had opened the bag of M&Ms that had been sitting between her and my dad while they were driving down the road, periodically handing us back handfuls of bright candy. I had climbed up to the middle seat where my brother's car seat was, slid in, while he went to the back to sit with Russ. Since I was in the middle, I had to give candy to my 2 younger brothers. It was odd because the candy coating was melting, leaving yellow and green smears all over my hands. It was the 80s and we weren't wearing seatbelts, My mum had just finished feeding Braden and set him back in the car seat, not bothering to buckle him up either. It's important to note that my brother Chase did not talk a lot. In fact, he only spoke when he really wanted to, which was quite rare, and this made all of the situation so much more shocking. We were rolling along in relative silence when my brother Chase yelled out, "Fire!" Everyone in the car quickly turned to see the orange and yellow flames in the back window. My mother quickly turned to my dad and quietly said, "Kevin, we're on fire." My dad started tapping the brakes to slow down, turned on his turn signal and tried to get us out of the right lane to the left lane so that we could stop. He looked at my mum, and I remember him saying in a hushed voice, "No brakes." At this point, other cars had begun to slow down with us and had started to honk on their horns to get our attention to let us know we were on fire. My dad continued into the left lane and nudged the guardrail, which startled us all. He was using it to help us slow down, since our brakes had long since burnt off and were probably laying in the middle of the highway somewhere. We had slowed down some, but were not slowing down enough. In my mum's mind, she saw us all perishing. She made a decision that to this day still shocks me. She opened her car door and leapt out. All of a sudden my mum was gone, I couldn't see her, and then the sliding door opened with a fierce crack. It promptly fell off and hit the road. My mum, being the superwoman that she was, leapt over the top of the door and continued to run alongside the van. The woman was running next to a moving, flaming vehicle. As we slowed down, the flames had become much higher. Now they were starting to encircle the van. They had slowly crept up from the back window around to the sides where the sliding door was, and were almost at the front doors. My mum was faced with a wall of fire between her and her children. She later told us that she couldn't see much through the flames. What she did see were the bright colors of Chase's coat. She reached through the flames and grabbed my little brother and pulled him out. She then threw him on the side of the road. He bumped and skidded along the soft shoulder of gravel. And a few moments later my dad was able to get the car stopped by bumping the guardrail. And now that my mum's door was shut because of the guardrail and the wall of fire that I saw out the sliding door, I had no way out. My dad threw open his door, and I saw my chance. I grabbed his broad shoulders and hung on for dear life. As he jumped out the van, he inadvertently dragged me along with him, pulling me over his seat. Boy, was I lucky. When he ran around to the side of the van, I slid off of him. I looked for my mum and saw her running down the mountain. I climbed over the guardrail and began to run to her and yell for her, and she turned and yelled at me to run. I started down the steep hill of the mountain. It was freezing. The snow had dug one of my socks off my foot. I stopped to look for my sock, and that is when I saw my mum saw me and yell again for me to keep running. She stopped and waited for me. When I got to her, she grabbed me and continued to run as fast as she could. I was cold, but she said it didn't matter. Little did I know that my dad had gone in to rescue my two other brothers. When he reached the side of the van where the sliding door had been, he was met with the same thing my mum was, a wall of fire. He knew that Braden's car seat was just beyond the flames. He reached out and grabbed my infant brother as the fire engulfed his car seat. My brother Russ had made it from the back seat to the middle and then to the front seats, and my dad told him to jump as the flames overtook the van. Turning to make his escape and jump over the guardrail, my dad reached behind for my brother. To his surprise and horror, my brother wasn't there. He turned and saw my brother still standing between the two front seats, so he did what any dad would. He reached through the fire once again and grabbed my brother by the back of his sweatpants. He yanked him out, threw him over the shoulder, quickly turning and putting one leg over the guardrail to make a dash for safety. The van exploded. The force knocked my dad over the rail and put him and my two brothers in the snow. He was able to keep hold of his sons and run. The van proceeded to explode twice more. As my mum and me went further down the mountain, she was able to see what was happening. When we eventually heard the boom, she shielded mine and my brother's tiny frames with her body. Eventually, we all met up on the side of the road. There was a nice older lady waiting for us with a blanket. She took me, Russ, and Chase and put us in her car with the heat on full blast. When the door shut, Russ turned to us and said, "Look." He opened his hands and had showed us a melted mess of green, yellow, and orange candy. They'd melted. Fire trucks and ambulances showed up. My mum was trying to hush Braden, but the heat had been so intense that it had dried up her milk and she couldn't feed him. The firemen gave us colouring books and oxygen. At the hospital, we were all examined. I only had a small scratch from the snow. Russ was treated for smoke inhalation. His blonde hair was now so matted and an orange colour from the heat and flames. My dad had no hair on either arm and no eyebrows and was treated for smoke inhalation also. My mum's arm was hairless. Her milk was dry, but she was fine. Chase had some road rash from my mum getting him out of the way. Poor Braden, he had it the worst. While my dad had been trying to get him out, there must have been a flame or some hot metal that he touched. He had been burnt so badly. 30 years on, fortunately, he has no scars or any lasting damage. We really should have all perished. There are a lot of ifs or buts, but the important thing is, we're alive. My parents are heroes. They saved not one, but 4 kids under the age of 7. They literally went through fire for us, risked life and limb, and that is pure love. That is family. The cause of the fire was a dime-sized hole in the gas tank. The mechanics had fixed everything but that. 30 years later, I'm still afraid to get into any red minivans. I used to date a girl in college who lived 3 hours away. We would trade weekends, one at her school, one at mine. One day she got upset because she had driven all the way to see me, and I was in an all-night study session which she had known about and couldn't be home to see her. She texted me that she was going back to her place and I never heard anything from her again. After 3 days of texting her trying to make sure she was okay, her messages started coming back as number not found. I sent her the stuff she'd left at my apartment in the mail and it returned as no forwarding address. Her instant messenger account, which I had never messaged but knew the name of, disconnected. And it gets weirder. I called her apartment landline and was told the people who had lived there had moved out. She had 3 roommates and didn't leave a number as to where they went. I got really freaked out and asked friends who worked in school admin to pull some strings, just to make sure she was alive. The school she was at didn't have any record of her as a student. The license plate to her car wasn't registered to anyone. None of our mutual friends ever saw her again, and I called the police, but there were no car accidents involving anyone who fit her description in the stretch of road between our 2 schools that night, or in the 2 weeks that followed. I didn't ask for a longer time frame because at that point, she was already missing. Cops wouldn't file a missing person report because I wasn't a family member. To this day, I have no idea what happened. Why she freaked out on me so bad, or if she's still alive, or in witness protection, or was erased from all time by an evil wizard. She literally vanished without a trace. This happened to me a while back when I decided to go on another camping trip alone. I always liked camping alone. There's something serene and sobering about being isolated in the middle of the wilderness, and I always found it relaxing. So I planned out what trail I was going to take, packed my camping gear and a firearm for protection, and jumped into my truck. I get to this trail early in the morning and hike about 15 to 20 miles in until I find the right spot, and head off the trail to find a place to put my tent up. I stumble upon this nice-sized clearing and decide that it's a nice, beautiful spot to settle down. I'm exhausted at this point, but set up the tent at the southernmost edge of the clearing next to the tree line and manage to get a fire going. I roast some weenies and start to hear a sound in the distance underneath all the forest noise. It sounded like an animal, mostly like a deer with some lame leg, as it sounded like the animal was making a walking, dragging noise. I felt bad for the poor guy, but it was too far away and too dark, so I couldn't really go find it to put it out of its misery. Thinking nothing of it after that, and about to go eat my food. After I eat, I douse the fire and crawl into my tent and insert myself into my sleeping bag, and I decide that even at my exhausted and relaxed state I can't go to sleep. So I pull out a book I brought with me and start to read by the light of my lamp. Hours go by, then I hear that sound again, this time closer, right at the opposite side of the clearing. Surprised, I put my book down and listen to this animal drag across the clearing towards my tent. It's really loud at this point, and it now sounds like the hooves are all being heavily planted, with the dragging noise following seconds after, like the deer is dragging something along. It makes it to what I assume is about the middle of the clearing and stops. I hear nothing. No breathing. I mean, not a sound from this animal. I unzip the tent and look into the clearing. There's nothing but trees and darkness. What the hell? Unnerved at this point, I zip the tent back up and sit there listening for other noises. Nothing. Just the crickets and the breeze, and I decide that there are a lot of strange noises in the woods and try not to let it bother me. Besides, I had my firearm. I start to doze off when I hear men's laughter off in the distance to my right, then women's laughter and sticks snapping far off to the left. I'm up now, wondering what I am hearing, if it's real, and if it's just a product of me being half asleep. I hear more faint laughing from a couple of other directions, all different, old men, old women, and even children, and that confirms it's real. The noises are closing in. I grab my rifle, preparing to fire a warning shot in the air in case they come too close. Something about this laughter, how far in I was, the noise earlier, and the time of night told me that this was not just another family strolling through the woods. I was on edge enough already, but then I noticed that the wildlife was now dead quiet. Not even the wind was making a noise. I decided enough was enough. I unzipped the tent and fired a shot into the night. I sat there and surveyed the tree line, saw nothing, and listened intensely to my surroundings. No laughing and the forest sounds had returned. Relaxing just a bit, and figuring that I'd scared whatever the hell that was off, I sat down in my exhausted state and fell asleep. I wake up later in a cold sweat, racked with anxiety, and it was still dark outside. I immediately hear two people whispering not too far from my tent. Alert, I grab my firearm and listen to what they're saying. I can't make out much, but I hear something about being lost, so I shout, "Hey, who's there?" The voices fall silent again, so I shout out, "Are you guys lost? Who's there?" Suddenly a huge burst of flame, like a flamethrower, erupted from the middle of the clearing, which illuminated several silhouettes of people just standing around. In shock, I fire my weapon, blowing a hole in the front of my tent, and it goes dark. Without checking my surroundings, I get up, sprint out of my tent, making a hard left back to where the trail was, and I hiked until sunrise back to my truck, with my head over my shoulders the entire way. I never heard anyone follow me, never saw anyone or anything the whole way, but couldn't shake the feeling I was being watched. After that, my enjoyment of camping alone left me, like I left all my gear in the woods that same night. I'm a 29-year-old female, and my partner is a 23-year-old female. We're back in her hometown visiting her family for about a week. It's a very small, isolated town in the middle of nowhere, and basically in the middle of the woods. While we were here, she wanted to meet up with an old high school friend who still lives in the area, Kyle. We met Kyle at the beach, and right away, he's acting super weird, making jokes that are highly inappropriate and unwelcome. Obviously, we're unfortunately used to this stuff to a certain extent, but coming from someone who was supposed to be her good friend, it was extra annoying. So me and my girlfriend were shooting each other panicked looks the whole time. Once he's out of earshot for a second, she says that she's sorry and that she's never seen him be like this before, and that we can make an excuse to leave. When he comes back, we tell him we want to get dinner at a local bar, but he just asks to join us. We felt awkward and ended up saying yes. He says he doesn't know quite how to get there, so he followed us. We get there, order drinks and food, and then head out to the patio with the drinks. He makes a few more gross comments, but is generally being way more cool than normal than he was at the beach. We're smoking on the patio and just chilling. The food arrives, we finish it quicker, and here's where it gets really messed up. Halfway through my first drink, I'm feeling really tired, which makes sense as I've had a long day. I give my girlfriend that signal that I want to go, and she makes an excuse that we need to leave. He keeps trying to get us to come to his house. I've got some really good stuff, and you can meet my cats, blah blah blah. He's being really pushy. We keep saying no and making excuses, and that we need to check on her grandpa. So finally we get into the car and say goodnight. We've parked next to each other and walked up to the cars together while saying our goodbyes. When we get in the car, my girlfriend informs me that she wants to stay at the bar, but fake it like we're leaving because she doesn't want to chill with him anymore, understandably. So we're sitting in the car waiting for him to leave first when he signals for us to roll down the window. We do. He says his GPS is being funny, and can we lead him to the main road? To be fair, we were in the middle of nowhere, so this didn't seem too outlandish, so obviously staying behind the bar was out at that point. In the car, we're talking about just how pushy he was being, and how she admits she feels strange driving right back to her grandparents' house, so we should drive into town until we lose him. He's behind us for a long time, even way after he should have gotten off his exit. We think it's weird, but aren't really sure what to do. Finally, we get onto a 2-lane road and he pulls up next to us and is waving a phone, which is clearly my girlfriend's phone, in the window. We pull over, he gives her the phone back, chats for a few seconds and then leaves in a hurry. Here's the part that makes my skin crawl. We knew she had her phone. I saw her put it in her fanny pack on the table along with my phone and a few other things a few minutes before we left the bar, as we were preparing to leave. She didn't take it back out. There's literally no way she could have left it at the bar. More importantly, he got into his car and left the bar at the same time as us, meaning he had to have already had the phone when we were leaving. It's not like we left the bar in the first place and he saw it was left on the table or something. He literally had to have been walking to the cars with us and calmly saying goodnight with the phone already in his possession. Now the kicker. Apparently, unbeknownst to me, my girlfriend has tasted a very weird bitter taste in her straw at the bar and was already suspicious, especially with how he'd been acting. This is why she wanted us to stay at the bar, to get away from him and stay in public where she felt safer. So when he walked up to the car to return her cell phone, she very casually and deliberately flashed the knife that she kept for protection in her jacket. I didn't know at the time that she had done this, so that's why he had left so quickly. Obviously, I was annoyed with her for not telling me her suspicions sooner, but she just didn't want me to panic. I'm really shaken up. A few things are clear though. He stole my girlfriend's phone, and it seems like he did that so we would be forced to pull over on a dark road in the middle of nowhere. He also ended the conversation and left when my girlfriend flashed her weapon, and they've been good friends for almost 10 years. If he wasn't planning on doing something malicious, I feel he would have acted confused about the weapon, or said something like, "Lol, what are you doing?" But instead he booked it, which tells me he knew exactly what she was doing, reacting to a threat and preparing to protect herself and me. Finally, he probably spiked our drinks. My girlfriend noticed a weird taste in her straw right away and chose not to finish her drink. I half finished mine and felt very tired. I don't know how he managed to nab the phone without us knowing or noticing. It doesn't really make sense, but he did. Me and my girlfriend both remember her putting it in the fanny pack perfectly. We also have no idea how he could have spiked our drinks unless he was working with the bartender, but we were the ones who suggested that bar. I don't know exactly how he did it, but I think I know why. And for that reason, my girlfriend's now ex-friend who made creepy comments and probably tried to spike our drinks and stole her phone in order to get us alone on a dark road. Let's not meet again. I live in New Orleans, and years ago my brother wanted to adopt a dog from a small rural town about 2 hours away. It was an easy enough drive, but we got close to the town of Clinton, and I started noticing a ton of police driving around. No sirens, nobody speeding by, but I think I probably saw 15 to 20 patrol cars in the span of about 10 minutes. We get to the house, meet the foster mum and the dog, who is the sweetest thing in the world, and decide to adopt her and head home about 2 hours later. Everything seems fine. Tally, the dog, climbs up in the front seat while I'm driving and falls asleep, leaving my brother to sit in the back by himself, which was hilarious. We keep driving and notice that there are even more cops driving around, but still no sirens. They're just everywhere though. As we're leaving Clinton, maybe about 3 miles or so to the exit, I notice this old white sedan coming flying up on our rear, flashing their lights and honking. I didn't really think about it, but I figured maybe these people were hurt or needed something. It definitely wasn't a cop car, but it was unusual for sure. I started to pull over to the shoulder, and they pulled over as well, about 10 to 15 yards behind us when they stopped. I stopped the car, and when I turned around, I looked at my brother. For some reason, as soon as our eyes met, the hair on the back of my neck stood on end, and I realized there was something very wrong about this. I hesitated, wanting to see if someone needed help, but as soon as the door of the car behind us opened, a voice in my head said to get the hell out of there. I peeled out, sped for the exit, making sure nobody had followed us, and we got back to New Orleans safe and sound. But the entire time I was watching for that car to ensure they didn't follow. I never learned what happened with all the police cars or the white sedan, but something was really wrong. I should have listened to my gut way sooner. Stopping even temporarily was really stupid of me. I hypothesize that there was some kind of raid or something, and the cops were looking for someone as we were driving through. The white sedan was trying to get us to pull over so they could carjack us and dodge the cops further. I don't know though, and I hope that it was someone innocent that needed help and I just bailed. But I don't know. I have a pretty strong feeling, as does my brother, that there was something funky going on. This happened to my childhood friend, Gene. He was the only son of an immigrant couple. They had him in later years, so he lived a completely sheltered life and had a complete lack of social skills and social development. They had no other family around, only friends, mostly other immigrants from the same country. Gene's father was very well off, but he lived like a miser. So Gene grew up thinking they were middle class bordering on poor. When Gene was in his 30s, his father passed away from an illness. Shortly after that, his mother was tragically struck by a vehicle and killed as she crossed a busy street. Gene was left all alone and in charge of a fortune in assets he was ill-prepared to handle. Out of nowhere, a relative from the old country appears. She was young, attractive, and a lady, supposedly a distant cousin. Soon she was seen with Jean here and there, not too often, but often enough that people began to notice. 3 months later, Jean simply vanished. No one knew where he went, why he wasn't around, and now the cousin had control of the fortune. Another friend of the family got concerned and called the local police to report him as a missing person. The guy in charge told the friend to never inquire again about Jean, to better leave this matter alone. No one knows what happened to Jean, but several of us have several guesses. This encounter happened a year ago at my university. I went to college in Illinois, for clarification. Now, I had a class in the late afternoon, and campus was very empty at the time. Most students took classes in the morning. I was the only one walking around campus at the time when 2 individuals approached me, asking me for some of my time. I'm a polite and well-mannered young woman, and I had some time, so I asked them how I could help. The individuals in question were Asian and dressed a bit controversially for the warmer weather, as this was September in Illinois. They were very friendly and had me sit down at a nearby table so they could explain their beliefs. Inwardly, I groaned and decided to feign interest until I could politely exit. Immediately, they asked me what religion I was. I replied that I was raised Roman Catholic, but no longer identified as such, and proceeded to rant on about how all other Christian religions had it wrong. God was their mother, and humans were once angels that sinned against God, so were condemned to the earth. The way these individuals spoke set me on edge, and I quickly said I had to go because class was starting soon. Here's where it gets a bit creepy. They got up and started to follow me into the lecture hall, still talking about God, the mother, and how they could help me come to the true church. This was a small lecture hall on the edge of campus, and was only used for my class during this time of day. I was half an hour early, so I feared it was just these evangelists and myself in an isolated building. I should also mention this building got very spotty cell reception, so calling the police or campus security would be an issue. I quickly walked to my classroom, determined to lock myself in. Thankfully, my professor was early and saw how disturbed I was and began yelling at my trackers that if they didn't leave, they would call campus security. That frightened them and they took off. My professor used the class phone to reach the student center and have campus security take a statement from me and escort me to my car. I've had other more creepy and harrowing encounters in my life, but something about those 2 people really disturbed me. It was the fanaticism in their eyes when they were speaking to me that was so frightening. After doing some research, I have discovered that these individuals were most likely from the World Mission Society Church of God. The sect was created in South Korea in the 60s and believes that their founder was Christ. I shared my experience with some friends at a party, and another girl spoke to me saying she has been approached by people saying the same thing. Another girl at the party overheard us and said her roommate had spoken about something similar. A week later, my sorority sister and her girlfriend were also targeted by this group. Since then, no one has seen them on campus. Truly, I have no problem with religion, but there have been accusations of this group being a cult and invading college campuses and speaking to young women in order to grow their numbers. Suffice to say, I was extremely frightened by them. I have since graduated and hope they never return. Thank you for taking the time to listening to my story, and if anyone has had similar encounters, I'd love to hear them. Please feel free to share. I grew up in a small town and could walk and play a couple of blocks from home, but only with the company of one of my older brothers, and later our family dog, a super protective Rottweiler mix when I was older. I was never allowed to leave the house by myself because my parents didn't want anything happening to me. There was a well-known neighborhood creep, probably 60 or so in age, that lived alone in a house on the street adjacent to ours. In the house next to his lived a couple that were good neighbors and great friends of my parents. Their name were the Smiths. They were about the same age as my parents and loved children, but they couldn't have any of their own. My parents had 7 biological kids and 4 non-biological. I was the youngest. There were a few incidents where I remember running into the neighborhood creep. One being when I was at the corner of the gas station with one of my brothers when he came up behind me and smelled my hair and told my brother that I was cute. Another time when I was riding with my dad in his truck and the guy flagged down my dad and asked him if I was my dad's wife, and I was 10 at the time. He was a major creep, but there is one incident that will always stick with me. Me and my siblings would occasionally go over to the Smiths' house because they were really nice, loved us, and would let us swim in their pool as we didn't have one. They would also pay us for doing small odd jobs. They sometimes would watch me for my parents, as most of my siblings were teenagers with a lot of extracurricular activities. One day, my brother and I went over to the Smiths' house. My brother was in charge of watching me that day, and Mr. Smith offered my brother some money to help him move some stuff out of the front of their house for a yard sale, and to help them sell things. While the yard sale was going on, I was sitting on their front porch playing with my Barbie doll. A few people had come and gone. My brother and Mr. Smith went inside to go through more things to sell, and Mrs. Smith was busy trying to help someone to buy things. Then came along neighborhood creep. He looks around a bit trying to seem interested in buying stuff, then came up to me, bent down, touched my hair and said, "How much for you?" I was incredibly shy as a child, and occasionally burst into tears even when someone waved at me that was unfamiliar. The man literally made me pee my pants. I immediately started crying and screaming repeatedly for my brother. Mr. Smith and my brother came running out, and all I remember was my brother picking me up and carrying me home, while Mr. Smith tried to figure out what happened. I recently started a job in a factory on swing shift, 4 p.m. to 2 a.m. I'm only 2 weeks in, but I can say right now that I do not feel safe there. I'm already an unimposing trans guy in a small conservative town, and I'm at the point where it's difficult to be stealthy, aka easy, obvious target. I also made the mistake of telling everyone that I used my preferred name but didn't correct them on calling me she or her. I figured that correcting them on pronouns would make it even more obvious that I do not belong. Last night was my second night completely on my own. My first week was training on day shift. I got in the car and headed home around 2:15. It was an hour commute, and right before I got on the highway, a truck got right up on my bumper and stayed there until I got into a well-lit part of the next city. If I changed lanes, so did he. He kept his brights on the whole time, and he disappeared for a bit, and I hoped that he was just being an arse and that was that. I made my way across the city without incident, until I turned off onto the scenic route home from there. This guy comes up quickly behind me out of nowhere, until he's right up on my bumper again. Same deal as earlier. Right behind, blinding me. I was definitely panicking at this point because no one else is on the road, and I know I'm the only one at work that lives in this town. He follows me for another 5 miles or so, then suddenly decides to make a sharp U-turn and book it out of there. I drove home as calmly as I could, drove around the police station a bit before finally going home. They didn't follow me the whole way. They must have gotten impatient after that half hour. I couldn't sleep at all, and I do not feel safe going to work after that. I've tried calling human resources, but no one answered the phone. I don't have anyone else's number at work, and at that late at night our small town police stations aren't even open. Anyone with advice, it would be greatly appreciated. I woke up at night for a glass of water. I walked into the kitchen and ran into my dad. He walked right past me to the front door, didn't even acknowledge me being there. "Where are you going?" I asked him. He didn't say anything and just had a blank stare and walked out the door. I walked over and looked out the window, looked through the peephole, and we had a small walkway that connects to our driveway. He was sitting on the hallway hunched over, elbows on his knees under a big tree. That was in front of my bedroom, just staring into nothing. I walked into my mum's bedroom and asked her why Dad was outside. She turned over and said, "What do you mean, he's right here?" There was my dad, laying by my mum's side, in a deep sleep. This happened when I was around 17 years old, and is still happening now. At 17, I felt lost in the world and stuck in a job I disliked, with work colleagues that didn't like me. This had to do with my accent, as I was quite well spoken, so they thought I was a rich kid. It all started on a Friday after work. The factory I worked in had half day on Fridays, so I would spend the rest of the day wandering around the city I lived in. It had been a tough day of relentless mocking, and I was reaching my breaking point. I went around the city looking for a new job. I visited the police recruitment center, the Army, Navy and Air Force centers, and even the International Red Cross. I just wanted to get away from it all. After a few hours, I had a bag full of career pamphlets and still no idea what to do with my life. I turned a corner and immediately saw a sign sitting in front of me. I can remember it so vividly. It said, "Free personality test. Are you curious about yourself? Come in." I then looked up at the building, and in a big fancy sign outside it said the Church of Scientology. Now before I continue, yes, I already knew about Scientology. However, I had a morbid curiosity about it. I'd heard all the horror stories and goings-on inside the church. But Tom Cruise was my favorite actor, and he seemed to have his life sorted out pretty good. My famous last words right there. So I went inside. I was immediately greeted by a very nice lady. She asked me how I was doing and what she could do for me today. I asked if I could speak to someone about the church and the personality test. She smiled and said, "I would be happy to. Please take a seat and I will get you someone to speak to." After a minute, I was introduced to an older man called Alan. He was the head of my city's Scientology center. Alan took me to a small room to talk privately. When we entered, I immediately noticed the large picture of L. Ron Hubbard on the wall. We sat down and genially had a nice talk. I told him about how I was unhappy about where my life was going, and told him how I wanted to leave plus all the troubles I was having at work. He seemed genuinely concerned for me and felt like he wanted to help. After a while of talking, I agreed to do the personality test. He gave me the test and left the room, saying to give the test to the receptionist after I had finished. 2 hours later, I was done. No joke, that's really how long it took. It was around 500 questions about anything and everything. I handed it to the receptionist, and she told me it would take some time to process. In the meantime, Alan had told her to take me to their private cinema and show me a film. I thought it was just going to be some old room in the back with a TV on the wall, but no. They did indeed have a private cinema that could seat nearly 50 people and had a very large screen in the front. It did feel a bit weird just being by myself in a cinema owned by Scientology, but I bet that hasn't happened to many people. Or maybe it has. Anyway, I sat down and they played me the film. It was about 30 minutes long and consisted of a narrator explaining those strange feelings you sometimes get, with some mediocre acting following along. I remember a section of how much you doubt yourself, knowing you have locked a door, but going back to check multiple times. At one point, the film showed how a past event that happened to your mother while she was pregnant with you could affect your life in a negative way. Example, your mother was sick on a flight, so you're scared of flying. I also vaguely remember something about rotten eggs and how such an event involving them can hurt you. I know it sounds absurd, but in some way the film really made sense to me. When the film was over, I was taken to Alan's office and he told me my results. He told me I was extremely depressed, one of the most unmotivated people he had ever met, lacking cognitive thinking, and I was a waste of talent. Now this made me very upset, but Alan said he could help me. He gave me about 4 books and a DVD, told me to read the books and watch the film before my course. What course? I asked. And Alan explained he'd sign me up to do a course at the centre. He convinced me that if I didn't do the course, my life would soon spiral out of control. He made me hand over quite a lot of money for the course and said I would receive an email about the course, which was in a month's time. I left the centre, ran home and immediately started reading the books I was given. This happened all over the weekend. I basically locked myself in my room and did nothing but read and reread those books and watch the DVDs over and over again. Over the next week, I began taking notes about myself and my family. I emailed Alan with questions and concerns and started resenting my mother for my life. I began to think she was the problem, that everything bad that has happened to me was the result of her. I started to treat her badly, swearing at her, and did the best I could to ignore her. When I emailed Alan about my mother, he told me that if she was the catalyst for my problems, then maybe I should consider disconnecting from her, and I took that seriously. I made plans to totally leave her out my life. A week before my course, I developed some kind of God complex towards everyone around me. What I read in those books told me what I could become. I saw everyone in my family as below me, and I really became a truly spiteful person. Just days before my course, I was confronted by my mother and father. They said they were concerned about me, and they searched my room. My dad took out all of my Scientology books and the DVDs. I was outraged. I screamed and cursed at my parents. I said horrible, wicked things to them and told them I was going to leave and how I never wanted to see them again. Hours of arguing back and forth, tears and crying. However, in the end, they did convince me that the church was a bad place. They said if I was so miserable at work, I should have told them, and that is true. To this day, I can't believe I didn't say anything to them. Instead, I went to Scientology. That night, after the arguing had stopped, they sat me down and comforted me. I really couldn't believe it. After the way I had treated them for the past 3 weeks, they still cared. The next day, I emailed Alan and told him I would not be coming back to the church. He quickly got back to me asking why, asking if it was my family and if I was being forced not to go. However, I ignored him. The emails I received in the next few weeks were mad. He told me stuff like I should leave my family now and I could stay at the church. He tried to convince me that it was all because of my mother. He even emailed me to say something along the lines of, he won't be surprised if he read in the papers that I was found dead by taking my own life. I'm very sure he crossed a line there, but I kept ignoring him. The strangest email I got was all in binary code. I used a binary code translator, but it came back as mixed up letters and numbers and none of it made sense. I eventually blocked him. However, it still hasn't stopped. About 2 or 3 times a year, I will get an email from the church. It's either asking how I am or asking about my family. When I get them, I immediately block their email address because they just keep coming. It's always someone new saying they heard about my case and they were worried about me. The whole reason I'm sharing this is because I just got one of these the other day and thought I would make a good warning. Please, I beg of you, do not go to a Church of Scientology center. If they can make me into a spiteful degenerate in just a few hours, then what can they do with a person in a few months or a year? And if you're lost in life, sad or upset, then please talk to your family, friends, or a doctor. When you are down, don't let others make you into a monster. Take it from me. After this event, I got help, and I'm a happy, confident person now. Oh, and Alan, if you're hearing this, you made me into a monster. So for your sake, let's not meet again. Since almost a year now, at the end of August 2019 to be exact, I have moved to an apartment in a different city because my mother, who I lived with in my hometown, passed away from cancer. I have moved here with my long-term boyfriend and one other roommate, who has been a very good friend to both of us since before we had even started dating. We all absolutely love it here. The location is great. It's a 15-minute bike ride from my university and is located at a square with a grocery store, drugstore, lunchrooms, etc. So we pretty much have everything we could possibly need to survive within walking distance. However, after just a month of living here, someone has started to ring the doorbell at exactly 11:05 p.m. semi-regularly. Sometimes every day, sometimes every other day. Sometimes there's a week in between, and sometimes there's a couple of weeks in between. But it's always at around 11:05 p.m. And every single time, I get no answer each time I ask through the intercom who it is. Except for once, but I'll get to that soon enough. At first, I thought it were friends from one of the neighbors who accidentally rang the wrong doorbell. But after the fourth time I grew suspicious, and after more than those 4 times I started noticing that it always happened at either exactly or around 11:05 p.m. My boyfriend and roommate both work at bars, and so they work until very late and would usually get in at around 2 a.m. So each time it happened, I was always alone at home, and it started to really freak me out after a while. When I first told them about it, they kind of shrugged it off and said that it was probably a wrong dial, like I thought at first. But when I told them that it had happened so many times, and sometimes even daily, they didn't believe me and thought I was just a little paranoid and spooked. However, one night when the doorbell rang again, and I answered the intercom asking who it was, I heard very heavy breathing. I was thoroughly spooked at that moment. I was again home alone and kept asking who they were and what they wanted. I couldn't make out from the breathing if it was a man or woman, but I heard a strange mumbling and then it was dead silent, as they had appeared to have left. I had put my apartment door on a double lock after that. I was so scared and spooked out, and thankfully my roommate got home a little earlier that night, around 30 minutes after the doorbell rang, and he could tell how upset I was. Now with the coronavirus, my roommate and boyfriend aren't able to work anymore, and they now also witnessed the frequent door ringing at 11:05, so they now do believe me, and I agree that it's very odd and creepy. We have a balcony that looks down to where our apartment building's main front door is, but because there's also a shop right underneath us that always has those curtain/roof things out, the view to the door is partially obscured. Every time our doorbell rang, me, my boyfriend and roommate would go to the balcony to see if we could see anyone, but we never could. I have also asked my neighbors from my apartment if their doorbell also gets rang so often, but the ones that I asked said it never happened to them. So 2 weeks ago, my roommate decides to do some investigating and went outside our apartment building at 11 p.m. He stands across the street and pretended to have a smoke while keeping an eye on the door. He said he saw a man who looked kind of suspicious wandering around our apartment building, who slowed down his pace significantly as soon as he approached our door. But when he spotted my roommate looking at him, he quickly walked away. We aren't certain if this is the door ringer, but it certainly was very suspicious. Our doorbell hasn't been rung at night since that day, and I'm hoping that maybe it will stop now. But there is a possibility that it will start again in the next few weeks. If this keeps up, I will contact the police about it. I've been planning to ask more neighbors from other apartments next to ours if this is also happening to them. If it doesn't, I will call the cops. I however doubt that they'll do anything right now, since the coronavirus and all. The police will only respond to serious crimes or immediate threatening situations. In any case, creepy guy, let's not meet again. Back in college, I took a road trip from Philadelphia to Washington. I was driving through the Midwest, but I can't remember where exactly. I drove through the US multiple times, and I can't remember if this happened on the upper or lower routes I'd taken. If I had to guess, I'd bet that it was Wyoming. It was late at night on an empty road. I was cruising at a decent speed, my car was working fine, and I had adequate snacks and water, and I was just jamming out to some CDs. Life was good, when I suddenly got an overwhelming feeling of something weird happening around me. I couldn't see anything besides the road. There were no mountains visible, the sky was overcast, and the only thing in existence seemed to be me and what was illuminated by my headlights. It was then that I saw another car, the only car I'd seen for a few hours, which stood out due to that it was a pickup truck with lots of rust around the back, and it had one of those cabin things on the bed, the covers with the windows, I don't know what they're called, that looked half busted with duct tape all over the window part. I hadn't seen it prior, and would have known it was driving in front of me too, and there were no connecting roads, so it must have come in from either the grass or off the shoulder where it had been parked. Anyway, I'm still cruising, but it was weird. I remember being frustrated because the guy in front of me was slowly reducing his speed, and thus mine. I considered passing him, but it was only 2 lanes and I didn't really want to do it in the dark, so whatever. It hit ahead when I noticed that in front of us there was a tiny forest all around the road. It stretched on for maybe 300 yards, and half of that away from the road, but covered it on both sides. The guy in front of me kept slowing down, but when we approached this point, he really started slowing down, almost like he intended to stop. This was not good. I suddenly passed him and sped up like a bat out of hell, putting everything in my trusty Crown Vic into action. I saw out the mirror that the truck ended up stopping and pulling off to the side completely, as I'm flooring it and thinking I must be paranoid, and the guy might need help. I see a van/truck, one of those big box types, parked in the trees off the road, and some shadows of people walking in front of it. I wasn't going to stop anyway, but that kept me from even thinking about the idea. Woke me right the hell up. Occasionally I do wonder what the hell they were up to. My family moved into a new home about 4 years ago, and I've always had an off feeling about the house, but I put it down to paranoia. I woke up in the middle of the night with scratches all over my body, but I had no reason to think I wasn't doing it in my sleep. I moved on to being a college student living on campus. I haven't woken up with scratches once. Now home for the holidays, the first night staying back in the house, I woke up with scratches. I stayed again and woke up with scratches the next morning, and my girlfriend finally made me realize it was only happening when I was staying home. So I stayed at her house for around 4 days and didn't get scratched once. Now, writing this, I had just stayed in my house again last night and woke up with a scratch on my side, and now I feel more creeped out than ever. I don't own any pets, and due to living on campus, my old room was taken over by my younger brother, so this happened sleeping in 2 different rooms. I've read about others' experiences, and next time I will sleep with gloves. I honestly don't want to wake up with new scratches. The thought of it is terrifying. I'm a 16-year-old teen at the time, bright-eyed and bushy-tailed, attending my first folk festival with a friend and her family. I am a totally naive girl, completely smitten with the whole hippie thing, thinking I'm so evolved and edgy, like everyone else there. Cringe. Dancing, music, attractive people, and an unspoken and assumed kindness, empathy, and trust amongst total strangers. Very anti-establishment and anti-individualistic mind frame, but also anti-stranger danger because love is everywhere and everyone is connected and we are all valued and safe, blah blah blah, you know. I was separated from my friends at the time and walked to the festival from the campground. A tall, slim man in a white robe approached me and started chatting me up. He was weird immediately, but it was also a folk festival. Weird is normal, and normal is weird, and I am an impressionable young girl desperately seeking approval. He told me I was beautiful and asked me where I was from, and I told him a small town an hour away and didn't say the name. He told me he was from the States and that his name was James in the Rain, and handed me his card. In the event that I'd be interested in attending another festival that he put on in his own community. I took the card and carried on. The festival ends, and 4 days after I've been at home. I'm working slicing meat in a deli, and James in the Rain enters the store. He immediately noticed the wristband still on my wrist and says, "You're the young girl from the festival." He continues to talk to me, doesn't buy anything, and even follows me up to the cash register to talk to me about random things while I'm trying to serve another customer. At this point, I'm scared and creeped out and really just want him to leave. He wouldn't leave until I gave him a hug, and I gave him one just so that he would leave me alone. And he left. Later I told my mum what happened. She looked him up on Google and turns out this guy is part of some commune called the Rainbow People, who recruit young women and brainwash them into leaving their families, force them to cut off all ties with their world, and join their community in the mountains. This happened back in 2016 on Christmas Eve night. We had just gotten back from my sister's and were sitting in the car for a few minutes. It was fairly cold. Keep this in mind. Also, side note, we had a bunch of cats, so at first we hadn't thought anything of it. We sat there for about 10 minutes and heard rustling. Not thinking anything about it, because of the cats, we blew it off. When not a minute later we heard it again. My mum just so happened to look up, and there was a bald man in a vest and shorts. My mum and I both had that uneasy feeling because of his choice of clothing. It was 32 degrees, and he's in summertime clothes. Very strange. My mum has her window cracked, and he was barely a foot away from our car. My mum yelled out to him and said to back away from the vehicle, which surprisingly he didn't. He continued to stand there and stare at us. My mum decided to try and scare him, so she yelled out to him that she was armed and would blow him away. She didn't have her firearm on her though. She definitely made sure he thought he did. He threw up his hands but continued to approach the car, so my mum threw her phone to me and told me to dial 911. I told the dispatcher what was going on, and she said she'd have the police there right away. My mother proceeded to try and run him down, but he went between two porches so that our car wouldn't fit. Finally, about half-hour later, the cops show up and took our statement. The station, bear in mind, was literally down the road, and if he'd actually have tried something, I knew his intentions were ill-willed, even if he had run away. So I was very annoyed that cops took so long to show up. They stayed and looked everywhere for him, but it came out empty. My mum nor I slept that night, or finished opening presents because of the fear he would return. The police thought maybe he wanted to steal the gifts that were in the car, but we'll never know. The scariest part is months later, it came to light he had escaped jail. He was put there for assault, so who knows what he would have done to my mother and I. During a road trip from New Jersey to North Carolina, my friend and I decided we were hungry and went looking for food in a town in Maryland. I don't really remember the name of the town, but it felt very strange as soon as we pulled onto the main road, as there didn't seem to be any people out and about. It was the middle of the day, but no one was walking around. There weren't any restaurant food options other than the pizza place, so we pulled up and parked in front of it. It seemed like everyone in the town must have gone to the pizza place, and when we parked the car, everyone in the restaurant turns and looks at our car through the big glass windows. Like at the same time they stared at us, we stared at them. It felt so weird that I said, "I don't want to go in there." My friend just nodded at me wide-eyed and we drove to another town for lunch. Why was seemingly the whole town in that pizza place? What was with the staring? I'm almost a little sorry we didn't go in and find out, but at the same time not sorry at all. This happened in an old farmhouse a few miles away from where I live, and the case is unsolved today. I live in Bavaria, Germany. It's an area with a lot of mountains and forests. This incident happened over 100 years ago. The family who lived in the farmhouse, along with its two workers, experienced many strange paranormal things, like foot trails in the snow which just led to nowhere, a few meters to the edge of the forest perhaps, and strange sounds at night, and the youngest daughter was telling the family that she was often visited by a tall man at night. One morning the whole family was found dead in their beds. Everyone had their heads smashed in with a blunt object. There were no signs that someone broke in, and the doors were all locked when the police arrived. Nothing was taken from the family, not even the gold necklace that the mother owned, which was right beside her bed and should be obvious if it were a burglary. The police also stated that there had been a lot of hate involved in the crime due to the brutality. The police investigated the crime scene, but didn't find anything. Another weird thing that happened in the barn. They locked it to investigate it later because there wasn't anything remarkable at first. But when they later returned, there was a rope with that hanging knot hanging from the ceiling. No one knew how it got there. Well, the case is around 100 years old, and if it happened nowadays, the police probably would be able to solve it with modern technology. But the paranormal things surrounding the house really creeped everyone out. I've never visited the farmhouse, but many say it's still haunted. I'm not sure about that personally. My friend and I were discussing scary things we've seen in the woods, and he told me a story that happened to his friend. So this guy was with 5 of his friends and were spending a few days in a cabin, hunting and trapping. They were not drunk, but had had a few beers to unwind one night. So one of them goes out to the outhouse to use the restroom, and he swears that off in the woods he hears the faint sound of drum beating. So he finishes in the outhouse and goes to the cabin and tells his friends to come check it out. So they all grab their respective weapons and walk out the ridge their cabin was on and down to the hollow behind it and back up the other side. It was a pretty rocky area, so the sound travelled far, and they could all tell that it was just over the hill where the sound was coming from. So 5 of them spread out about 50 feet apart and walk up to the top. They couldn't see down because of all the laurel bush around them, so the 5 of them wait, and one of them sneaked down through it to see what it was. When he got there, he stood and watched for about 30 seconds to a minute, before he turned around and went to his friends as fast as he could, telling them he saw evil and they had to get the hell out of there right now. All he would tell them is that he saw a bunch of naked people dancing around in a circle, chanting in some strange language. He never told them about everything he saw. The guy who told my friend this story was one of the guys who was hunting back then, and didn't ever see what truly happened. I have an 100-pound German Shepherd who's pretty friendly. So while walking him in my neighborhood one day, this guy comes running up to me and accuses me of being a cop because I have such a large cop-like dog. Not realizing the level of crazy I was about to be exposed to, I politely said no and continued to walk my dog. This continued to escalate over the next few weeks. Every time I saw this guy, he would accuse me of being a cop, following behind me and constantly babbling about he knew I was there to take his stash, and if I just would follow him into his house, he would show them to me. Then one day I start to notice he apparently is now camping out all night long in the playground outside my house, while swinging a sock with a rock in it. At this point I had called the cops, and they told me there was nothing they could do. It only got worse after that. Every time I left my house to go to my car, which was parked out in front of my house, he would come running from the playground or from the front stoop of his house screaming that he knew I was a cop, and that I couldn't catch him. So I called the cops again. They came out to talk to the family and said he apparently is very disturbed and there isn't anything they can do. The final straw was when he decided to yell veiled death threats into his cell phone while running to beat me to my car while I left for work one day. When I told the cops and told them about the death threats, they showed up in force, arrested him, as apparently he was wanted for various things. I used to really enjoy driving around at night, especially because round where I live there are lots of country roads and they were fun to zip around. One evening after I'd been at a friend's house, I decided to drive to my church, about a half hour away from home, and back just listening to music. The route is one I've done most Sundays for 17 years being driven, and I have been driving it for about 4 years at this point, so even in the dark I felt fine to drive the speed limit, which is 60. I got maybe a quarter of a mile there, and my stomach started twisting. I knew that if I kept on going I regretted, but I shook it off. It wasn't late and the weather was fine. I wasn't going to miss this driving opportunity. But as I got further, the feeling in my stomach got worse, and I realized I had to turn around. Just before I reached the hill pass that's about halfway to the church, I pulled a U-turn and went home, and stopped feeling so anxious and forgot about it. The next day, I woke up and got in my car to go to church to find my usual route had been closed. Turned out that on the hill pass, the road had crumbled away, leaving a sheer drop that would have been around a blind bend for me. The road issue had been called in by a driver going the opposite direction to me about 5 minutes after I had pulled a U-turn and driven away. I'd definitely have been, at the very least, badly hurt had I kept on going. This didn't happen to me, but my friend. Back in 1998, I was at 2nd grade and was coming home from school alone for the first time. I had a bit of overprotective parents since I lived about a block away from my school, and I was stopped by an elderly woman who said she had something to tell me. She said she had no husband, had lost her son years ago, and just wanted to give me a hug. Something about this woman gave me the creeps, and now later on thinking she did look and talk a bit weird, almost like she was a man dressed in old woman's clothes. But this could really just have been my juvenile imagination messing around. After asking me for a hug, she reached her hands towards me and motioned for wanting a hug. I took off and ran as fast as I could all the way home. As I ran, I heard her laughing really loud, in a low, manly laugh. When I got home, I told my mum about it, but she wasn't worried at all and told me that it was probably just an old and lonely woman who needed a hug. Here in Finland, we have this magazine called Alibi, which has the most recent news about burglaries, thefts, and all manner of terrible, terrible things. And for some reason, 8-year-old me was not allowed to go anywhere near this magazine, obviously. But a few weeks after the incident with the old woman, I did get my hands on a copy, which was brand new. I read about an incident that happened in the area in which I lived, about a boy my age last seen by his friends hugging an old woman and walking somewhere with her never to be seen again. The case is still unsolved today, 15 years later, and it gives me the shivers, as that could have been me. But I feel for that poor, poor boy. My brother-in-law's dad told me this story. In his home country back in the 70s, as he was walking on the street, he was robbed, jumped, and left for dead. He didn't remember what happened once he hit the floor, but remembers waking up in a random home being helped by an older man. The man helping him out identified as a pastor or priest. He was very weak and was told to stay inside the home. It was big enough for him to walk around, but they wanted him to stay inside the room so that he could get better. He would black out at times and fall asleep. On the second day, he felt so much better that he wakes up and starts exploring the home. He couldn't see the man, so he randomly kept walking around. He found a hallway, and at the end of the hallway there was a curtain placed on the wall so that it would seem like it was a dead end or a window. He didn't see any natural light coming from the top edge or bottom edge, as one would expect with curtains, so he opened the curtains to reveal a guy in a very bad state. And he saw the room was full of satanic and evil symbols. As soon as he saw that, he ran out the door and left that place. He does recall that when he was blacking out throughout the day, he would hear voices speaking in an unknown language, kind of like what cult members do. He probably would have been next in whatever that cult was planning to do. He was so glad he got away. As a child, think kindergarten age, I loved to talk. If anyone had a question for me, I would gleefully give them way too much information. Most people found it endearing and would praise me for being so smart, which encouraged me a lot. My mum and I normally shopped at the market just a few minutes away from our house. My mum had been shopping there for 20-some years at that point, and I was friends with most of the workers. So I was friendly with them too, and, as always, was happy to talk to them. Whenever my mum got distracted talking to someone, I, with the attention span of a 6-year-old, would wander around the aisle. My mum would keep an eye to make sure I didn't get too far, but if she was distracted, one of the employees would usually be around and gently guide me back over. One day though, we went to a different market that I couldn't remember having been to before, and we didn't go back to for nearly a decade. We were walking around the aisles when my mum ran into her friend. They started talking, and I, not realizing that I no longer had a store full of adults keeping an eye on me, started wandering around the aisle. My eye caught some colourful display, I think flowers or balloons or something, and I went over to look. Once I was satisfied with my inspection, I turned back to the aisle only to find that my mum wasn't there. Strange, that never happened before. I looked around a little, although not moving from my spot near the colourful display, since it was right near the registers and there were a decent amount of people nearby, which I'm now thankful for. As I was looking around, an employee came up to me. He was older than my sister, as she was around 12 or 13 at the time, and younger than my dad in his mid-40s, which was about the only way I could gauge age. Now I would say he was probably in his early to mid-20s. "Hi there," he said sweetly, in that tone you normally speak to kids in. I cheerfully said hello, actually stepping a little closer. "Are you looking for your mummy?" I say yes, happily explaining that I had last seen her talking to her friend and that I could normally find her easily when I wandered away, so I wasn't sure where she could have gone. "Does she leave you alone often?" "Not really. My older sister was normally with me if my mum wasn't. She was 12 and she was super mature. So if my mum had to leave me for a bit, she knew I'd be okay. And she never left us alone in public, just at home if she needed to run somewhere. And my dad was at work a lot and didn't come back until late usually, just if you were wondering." "Where do you live?" Well, wouldn't you know it, I'd even learned my address. We just learned how to mail a letter in school, and even took a little class trip to the mailbox on our school corner to send them out. I know how to write my address now, and I knew how to say it. "Do you want to hear it?" "Of course you do." I know kids are naive, but I was downright dumb. I was diagnosed with diabetic colorblindness 2 years later, otherwise known as red-green colorblindness. Makes sense, as I was totally blind to all the red flags. "Where do you go to school? Who picks you up?" "Well, I go to the local elementary school. I don't know the address though, sorry, but I knew what street it was on because I walk the sidewalk from my mum's or daycare sitter, depending on the day. So I see the street sign a lot since I'm usually waiting for a while to be grabbed." "Do you like animals? Do you like puppies?" "Dogs scare me, cats scare me, pigeons scare me, fish scare me, flies scare me. You know what doesn't scare me though? Turtles. I have 5. No dogs that might bark or bite if someone drops the house, like our neighbors does. The dogs are always behind the gate though, so they don't scare me a lot." I'd only been a few minutes since I last saw my mum, even with how much information I was dumping, as I was a fast talker. But I was starting to get a little antsy, not because I was uncomfortable speaking to strangers, but because I had skipped lunch that day, specifically to con my mum into letting me get a bagel from the store next door, which was why we were at the market in the first place. My mum was holding onto the bagel to make sure I didn't try and eat it too fast to choke, which I had done several times in the past. I wanted my bagel, and while I liked talking to this grown man who made me feel smart and was oh so interested in my life, I loved bagels more. Plus, if I caught my mom when we were near the bakery section, I might be able to use my charm and cuteness to get a cookie. So I gotta find my mum now. "Oh, well, I'll walk around with you to help you find her." "You want to lead me through the market you work at, where you can easily bring me to the back room, meat locker, or any number of places? Sounds good." That's when I heard it. "Ozzy." I look around to see my mum, the relieved look on her face slowly change into something more anxious. I smile happily and wave over to her. She immediately grabs my hand, and I can tell she wants to chide me, probably for leaving the aisle, but she seems more occupied on the man in front of me. Before I can even open my mouth to introduce him, or remember that I never got his name, he quickly says he's glad I found my mum, and he needs to get back to work, and practically runs to the back of the store. My mum puts her hand on my shoulder and looks me in the eye, her expression a lot more worried now. "What was he talking to you about?" she asks, her voice more serious than I'd ever heard. "Can I have my bagel?" My mum opens her mouth, pauses, and goes into her purse to hand me my bagel. Between bites, I happily tell her about the conversation and everything I remembered, my age, grades, pickup schedule, likes, dislikes, and my literal address. My mum gradually became paler, then became red with anger. She brought me over to the manager, and I don't remember much about that conversation. I got a cookie, I remember that pretty well. It was shaped like a watermelon, which was apparently far more important to me than paying attention to what was being said. The police weren't called. We went home, and my mum told me I wasn't allowed to walk around the store anymore. No more talking to any strangers, even if they worked at the store we were at, unless she was with me. If I ever saw that man again, I was to run away, to find someone I knew and ask for help. If all else fails, to scream at the top of my lungs, just like I would when a fly would land on me. God, insects are creepy. I agreed pleasantly, not really fazed by anything she said, and I know that some people are bad, but bad people look bad, right? They talk mean, they look scary and try to grab you. This guy didn't, so he wasn't bad, was he? But if my mum was saying it, then I'd listen. And I'd better enjoy that cookie because we weren't going back to that store ever again. In exchange, I can get a donut once a month from our annual store. When I was around 12, our school had a safety assembly, and we're talking about the shady things adults do to get kids close, and a very watered down version of what they most likely wanted. And I'm sitting there, listening, and suddenly realize, oh, if my mum hadn't found me, something bad might have happened. If not in the store, then in front of the school. And if not in the front of my school, then my home. A little over a decade later, and I've never seen the man again. Let's keep it that way. It was about 1:45 p.m. in Houston, Texas. I was driving to my job as a nanny about 15 minutes away from my house. Currently, I was less than a minute away from my house, in my car waiting at a red light. The light turned green, and I accelerated as you do. Well, I was reaching the end of the intersection, and a car from the cross lane of traffic ran his red light and darted in front of me. So quickly, I didn't have any time to brake at all. I hit him going at roughly 15 to 20, and immediately he got out his car and gestured for me to unlock my passenger side door, which I did because I was frazzled, having just gotten into a car accident. He immediately opened his door and started spinning a tale. "Listen, I'm an off-duty police officer chasing a suspect. Didn't you see me?" "No," I said, because he hadn't been chasing anyone. Traffic was slow since we were in a residential area, and no other cars had decided to run a red light. "Didn't you see my lights?" "No," because he didn't have any lights. He was in an older model SUV or minivan, not a police car. Keep in mind, he also wasn't in any sort of uniform, just a blue shirt and jeans. He was very thin, between the ages of 40 to 50, and had no police gear with him. "Well, I can call 911 and have you arrested," he said. "I had right of way," I told him, "since my light was green, and I'm gonna need to see some ID. I'm proud to say that I, despite being a short girl, was decidedly unfriendly. I am absolutely not trying to get scammed on my way to work, bud." He gave me a look like, wow, I can't believe this idiot is asking me for ID. "Listen, I'm undercover. I'm with the feds." So in the span of 30 seconds, he's risen from a member of the Houston PD to an undercover federal agent. "Right. I'm gonna need to see some ID. I'm undercover. My life and operation will be at risk if you don't comply. Your life is in danger. There are people watching me right now." I stared back at him unimpressed. My mother has told me multiple times, ever since I was a baby, I've been able to communicate with a single expression how little I care for the lives of others. I was giving him that look, the one that says, why does a simple ant think he has the right to speak to me? "I'm going to need some ID. And insurance," I insisted. Now, having apparently given up, he noticed that my purse was on the passenger seat. Keep in mind he's leaning through the passenger door, which I had foolishly unlocked for him. Having thought this was going to be a normal car accident, he reached for it now, grabbing the canvas of the bag as opposed to the leather handle. "I'm gonna need this. he began. But I interrupted, grabbing my purse in a death grip. I may be small, but my grip is about the same strength as a pit bull, and there's no way I was going to let him hit my car and then have the audacity to steal my purse. No, you don't. Yes, I need to see ID so that I can report you. I don't even remember what bogus lies he told me. He was rambling at this point. He told me something about pretending to be a pimp. He needed me to pretend to give him money. His family was at risk. I don't know. At one point, he almost looked close to tears, which frankly was a bit much. There is absolutely no reason you need my purse, and you will not be getting it. You can't have it. If you're a federal agent, give me ID. I was gripping my purse so firmly my fingers were turning white from pressure. I kept glancing at where my cell phone was in the cup holder, but I didn't think I'd be quick enough to grab it and dial for the real police before he took it. He didn't ever try to jerk it from my grip, which is probably good because I would have straight up lost it to him. My car was still on and still drivable, and I'm not even joking when I say that I would have run his dumb ass down. He finally let go. Fine, let's meet at the nearest gas station. The one across the street? I asked. No, the one down the road. Can I trust you to meet me there? Yes, of course, I lied unconvincingly. I'm a good liar, don't get me wrong, but I wasn't even trying to act like I was going to meet him. I just wanted him to get out of my car. I was already thinking of the damages and how much it would cost, and if he wanted to take what little money I had, he would have to pry it from my cold, mortis-rigged fingers one by one, because I would never let him have it. Okay, I'll meet you at the gas station down the road. Can I trust you not to go to the police? He said. Yeah, fine. He finally left, entered his vehicle and started it up. He tried to have me go first, but I was having none of it, and I gestured him and he gestured me, and I was still wearing that absolute deadpan face. I was already on the phone with the police when he turned down the street that led to the gas station, and I obviously passed him and drove straight to the nearest police station as the operator advised me. I actually wasn't scared during this process. I'm someone who tends to get unnaturally calm during a crisis, but I was completely calm while making the statement with the police not 20 minutes later. But of course, as soon as I walk out the police station, I just broke down sobbing. I wouldn't say this is the scariest thing that's ever happened to me, but it was scary because I'd recently moved to Houston, and all my family and extended family lives in Washington state, so I felt alone. I live with my aunt and cousin, but I have 3 siblings and 15 cousins and 17 aunts and uncles and a whole host of extended family in Washington, and I never realized how safe I felt in my small town until I was almost robbed in the big city. Also, since I'm paranoid and listen to a lot of true crime media, I parked my car a few streets over from my house and walked home. He had mentioned something about me living in the neighborhood that was within walking distance of the car accident, as well as trying to convince me I knew him somehow, which was strange. And also stupid, as I legitimately don't know anyone in Houston. In any case, I'm grateful that nothing more happened with this incident. Thank you for listening, and beware of dumb drivers that hit you with your car and then try to take things from you. Remember, you can always ask a cop for ID, and do not let anyone take anything from you without there being good reason for it. The first house that my mum and stepfather bought after they got pregnant with my sister had a few weird things happen. When she got old enough to communicate, she would wake up with a rash on her back crying about the bees on the ceiling. That was pretty much the extent of what happened in the actual house. But we had a detached garage probably 30 feet away from the back door of the house, and the garage had a loft that I decorated and hung out in when I was in my early teens. It started when I was jamming to music one day and thought I heard someone come in, and being rattled through the toolbox downstairs, I shut my music off and called out to no one there. I turned my music back on a little while later, thinking I was hearing a quiet conversation going on as if someone was on the phone. I turned my music back off and called out again to no one. So I turned on my music quieter, and swore I could hear some more rattling and someone open and close the door to leave. I packed up my stuff and go into the house to ask around, and nobody has been in the garage all day but me. I stopped hanging out up there. More and more I got a really eerie feeling about the garage, to the point where I don't like to even have my back to it in broad daylight because it makes me feel strange. Sometime later I was telling my friend about it and he was like, "Oh, my dad has a camera, let's see what happens when we leave the camera there." So in the evening, as the sun was setting, he gets his dad's camera and we sit up there facing the front room. In the garage, you climb up a ladder in the back of the room, up into a large hole in the floor of the loft, and if you look towards the front of the room, you can see where the barn doors of the loft crack open and leave in a bit of light. So this is a rectangular little camera that's got nothing fancy about it, very much like the ones that most people own. We have the lights off, set it facing the front, and as we descend, I take note that there's a little blue light on the back of the camera as it's recording, since I've already been tasked with retrieving the camera when we're done, and I want to remember what I'm looking for. So we go and talk with my mum, who thinks I'm crazy. 20 minutes later, we go up to fetch the camera and the blue light is gone. What the hell? I reach out and feel for it and realize the camera has rolled over, not even onto its flat screen, but then once more onto its narrow top side to face the back wall of the garage. I grabbed it and bolted faster than I ever had in my life. We watched the recording and sure enough, about 5 minutes later, after seeing nothing, we then heard a thud and watched the camera seemingly roll over alone with enough momentum to not stop on the wide flat side but to the next narrow end. We tried to leave the camera up overnight, but his dad came to get it and I never saw the recording again. Back in 2015, I studied abroad in Japan for a semester. I made some great friends during my program, some of which I still chat to this day. I was with my friend Rick in the heart of the Tokyo subway station. He and I are both quite proficient in Japanese, so we were able to find our way around fairly easily. At the time this happened, we were looking at a map and trying to figure out the best route to our next destination. Apparently we looked lost. Rick was pointing on the map and suddenly 2 middle-aged women politely interrupted us. Our following conversation was all in Japanese, but I'm obviously going to share it in English here. The first woman asked if we were lost and if we needed help. Rick replied no, and that we were in fact fine, that we were just trying to get to a particular location, and that we have our route planned out. She replied by saying that we shouldn't take that route. It isn't the best way. Interested in saving time and money, Rick and I inquired about the better route, and this is where it starts to get weird. The woman pointed to a location where we would get off. I thought it was strange because all the stops on the map were marked with a dot. There was clearly no dot where she was pointing to. That stop didn't exist. I gave Rick a look, and his face showed me he understood. While we were trying to figure this out, the woman suddenly says, "Would you like to make some Japanese memories? We can take you there." I thought the phrase was odd, but that they were probably going to recommend a tourist site or something. She pointed at a place on the map that did indeed have a stop, but was over 1 hour away in the middle of nowhere. We said we were all set and just wanted to get to our destination. That's when she said, "Oh, come to the shrine, make some Japanese memories. Come worship Jesus. It would be such a shame to waste this time." The exact phrase used was "mottainai," if you're curious. I thought shrine in the middle of nowhere and Jesus, this doesn't sound good. We indicated with regret that we wouldn't and began to walk away. As we started quickly in the opposite direction, they called after us louder and louder saying, "What a waste. You should come worship Jesus at the shrine. Take pictures, it's such a shame, such a waste." When I returned home to my host mother, I told her about it, and I said I thought they were part of the Japanese new religion groups, which are fringe religions that have formed in recent times that are usually conglomerates of other religions and usually resemble cults. She gravely agreed. To this day I have no idea what would have happened had we gone. Not that I think logically we would have ever have made that decision. Perhaps they were trying to recruit us to their religion. Maybe they really did just want us to take pictures, which I doubt. Or perhaps there was something more sinister at work. But I will never know because I don't have the slightest idea of what their new religion was. But I can't think of anything good happening at a shrine in the middle of nowhere, with two foreigners who were lured out. I'm a 22-year-old female, and this happened back when I was around 14. I was a freshman in high school, and I lived in Georgia. Every year in the fall, the fair comes to town. They have fun rides, booths where you can win prizes, and really good fair food everywhere. I usually go with my family, but this year I was going to meet up with my boyfriend and hang out with him and his friends. I arrived with my family and text my boyfriend to meet up. When I find him in the crowd, he pulled me aside and broke up with me. What a place to get dumped, right? Anyway, this was the end of the world to my 14-year-old self, and I definitely didn't want to return to my family. I was all alone and decided to sit down at a picnic table and cry. I had my head down and nobody was around me until this man approached. This man was older, 50 to 60-ish, a white, overweight male, stereotypical carny-looking worker. He sits down at the table I'm at, right next to me, and starts asking what's wrong. Now I was a late bloomer, so when I was 14 I probably looked closer to 12. Being so upset, I told him that my boyfriend had just broken up with me. He puts his hands on my shoulder and tells me that he was sorry, and he would never dump me if he was with me. I didn't reply. He then tells me that he runs a booth over in the furthest corner of the fairground, and if I went to that booth, he would give me a free stuffed animal. He told me the type of booth he ran, but I can't remember what it was. Something like the water guns or something. He pointed me to where the booth was, which ended up being a really secluded corner. I said thanks, and that I might find him later. He exits. I get myself together, wipe the tears up, and go find my family again. We had a systematic way of going to every part of the fair to make sure that we got a good chance to ride everything. I walk around the entire fairground looking at every booth, especially the water gun one, and I never saw him. He was definitely not working one of them, because I would have seen his face and remembered him. I really wanted a stuffed animal, so I was disappointed that I never did find him. I never told my mum about it because I was really embarrassed to be dumped at the fair. Looking back on it now, I realized the dangerous situation that it could have led to. This man tried to lure me to a secluded corner of the fair to do God knows what. I'm glad I never got to see him. When I was a sophomore in high school, a friend would drive me home. One day we went to a record store with two other friends, and on the way back to drop me off, this guy in a truck passed us, narrowly missing our car in oncoming traffic, and we decided it'd be fun to follow him for a bit. So he turns onto another road shortly after and immediately pulls up to a mailbox and starts retrieving his mail. As we pass him, all four of us flip him off out the window and continue driving down the road. About half a mile later, we see the same vehicle driving insanely fast behind us. He tailgates us for a bit, and we start to panic a little. We start to slow down for a stop sign, and the guy whips around and cuts us off, slamming on his brakes in front of us. We wait for the moment, and he steps out of his car with a crowbar. We drive around him, but there's a stop sign in front of us we had to briefly pause at. The guy runs towards my door and grabs it, when my friend takes off. We're flying down the road hoping to lose him. We make another turn onto a really busy street and think we've lost him, and we turn again and drive normally for a few miles. At this point, we're convinced we're safe. We pull up to another intersection and are waiting in the right turn lane. We look behind us, and 2 or 3 cars away is the same dude, in the turning lane flashing his headlights on and off. We make our turn and speed down the road, but so does the other guy. He speeds around us and slams on his brakes, forcing us to stop. We try and go around him, but he keeps maneuvering so we can't do that. Eventually we stop and I say something stupid like, maybe he just wants to talk to us. So he's straddling both lanes of the road, gets out of his car with his crowbar in hand and a terrifying look on his face. My friend drives off the road, gets around the dude, and we speed away. Of course, he does the same and is driving like a maniac, but so are we, and we maintain a bit of lead on him. We make another turn and there's a school bus in front of us, just about to stop. We speed around it just in time for the bus's stop sign to extend, and for some reason the dude actually stops behind it and we speed off. We were close to another friend's house, so we pull into their driveway and into the open garage. We're all terrified at this point, so we run inside and watch out the window for this guy. He drives past the house, but thank goodness we were parked in the garage so he didn't see the car. Moral of the story? Don't mess with people. They may be crazy. My house, which I rent, has a ground floor and 2 more floors, so 3 in total. I was getting ready to go out, and I went to the first floor, in my room to get my makeup. I went to the second floor in my flatmate's room to do my makeup there. I go back to my room about 45 minutes later, and I see 3 of my purses on the floor, and the shoulder handle has been cut on 2 of them and a little bit on the 3rd one. Both purses are cut in the same way, in the same spots. I start freaking out a bit because no one was in the house except me and my flatmate, and we've been living together upstairs the whole time. In the living room, which is on the ground floor, we had left the back window open so the air could ventilate, and we had some people over the night before. The door in the living room leads to a tiny garden which is protected by a tall fence, which is more protected by a wired fence, and I doubt anyone could have just climbed it and come in, cut purses, take no money or cards from either of them and then leave. The complex has 8 flats, so all the tiny gardens are connected in a long line, but we are only connected to one as we are the last flat in this line. So absolutely nothing was stolen or even moved, and we see no marks anywhere. But it's still weird, so I call the police to find an explanation. They come, checked the evidence. There was a wet spot on the carpet in a room about 5 centimeters long, and how the purses are cut. I thought it was a fox that went in the house, went upstairs, ate the bags and left, based on facts that a fox tried to enter the living room one time, in the same way a few weeks ago. The police said it was not an animal cut. It was most probably a knife cut, and asked if we had any problems with anyone like an ex or something. We do not. Most people do not even know where I live, and especially how to get to one's room, as the house is pretty complicated. The stairs in the house are metal and spiraled, and you basically hear it from every spot in the house if someone is on the stairs. Police call forensics to ask for advice, and they say they do not know what they could do as they can't take fingerprints off the bags because of the texture, and the wet spot is apparently dry now. Police say they've never heard of anything like it, and it makes no sense. They marked it off as a burglary and left. I have to mention that the night to morning before, we had the music pretty loud, and one neighbor texted us very angrily to stop it. I mean, he knows the house as we have the same structure. He was the only one with access, but he's like 75 years old, and all the encounters we had were really nice so far. So we were left with something or someone that comes to the house through the back garden that's protected by a very high wall and wide fence, comes through the living room, passes by the PS4, TV, expensive speakers, goes onto the hallway, passes very expensive shoes, goes up the stairs, enters a bedroom, cuts the handle to the purses, doesn't take anything, and then just leaves. I slept in my flatmate's room that night, and today I went into my room to clean it up, and I found one of the missing handle pieces in my bed, under the blanket. What the hell is going on? I have no explanation for any of this, and simply wish I did. I got an Airbnb in Fort Worth at what seemed to be a spiritual retreat. We arrived to a padlocked gate with cameras, and the lady who opened the door had no shoes on. Looking around, there was furniture and overgrown shrubbery everywhere. The main house was dilapidated with rotting wood. We went inside and they asked me and my girlfriend to sign waivers. This was the first red flag. We then walked out of the house to where we would be sleeping. While we walked through the compound, we saw other people that seemed somewhat normal, also without shoes. Our bedroom was an old RV near the back of the property. The RV was collapsed at the front, and they had tried to cover it up with a bedsheet. After trying to reason why the situation was okay, me and my girlfriend decided to look around to make sure it wasn't as sketchy as we were making it out to be. During our walk, we saw these long wooden boxes that had strange labels on them. I was getting very cult vibes from the people there as well. Some of them seemed entranced. Then a little girl came up to us with no shoes and started talking to us. The conversation was friendly at first, but then it took a turn. She then said something extremely creepy that horrified both of us. I don't even want to mention the comment. At first I thought she was being sarcastic or joking, but she kept following us and talking about pretty messed up stuff, and that's when we knew we needed to get out of there. I told the lady that me and my girlfriend wanted to get dinner in town, so if she could open the gate for us and let us out without arousing suspicion. Later on, I saw the main guy I met at the Airbnb on the Flat Earth Convention video by All Gas No Brakes on YouTube. My mother, my sister and I had a day out a few cities over, so we were all generally in a good mood as we walked by some vandalized buildings to get to the back of the car. I think I may have been the one to spot him first. As far as I can remember, he was the only other person around aside from our group. He was dressed for the weather in shorts and a short-sleeved shirt and appeared normal. But after he caught sight of us, he almost immediately changed his trajectory towards us. I felt my mother stiffen slightly from where she stood beside me as he approached. Even if the memory wasn't slightly foggy from the passage of time, I still wouldn't be able to make out the things he said. As far as I could tell, he was shouting something about God at my mother before demanding to know if those girls were Catholics. My mother pushed us away from him slightly and stuttered out a response, clearly blindsided by the random question. My sister looked confused but stayed silent, and I took the opportunity to move slightly to the side so that there was more distance between me and this random guy who had shouted about God in my mother's face. The guy then shoved a small package into my sister and mother's hands while ignoring me completely. He shouted something like, "That's the word of the Lord on those leaflets there. You better read them, or I'll end you both." At that point, I was considering decking him in the face because he had shoved his own face way down close to my sister's to be any sort of comfortable. But my mother pushed her even further back while she hastily voiced her agreement. Seeming satisfied, the man walked off, but not before shouting more random things into my mother's face. She nodded and agreed with whatever he was saying, and as soon as he was out of sight, she placed a hand on both our backs and hurried us along. I remember thinking at the time that the things he had given them were clearly not leaflets, and I was proven right when my mother stopped walking after, and we were a good distance away and opened hers. She recoiled and abandoned it and got my sister to do the same. My mother thought it was tobacco, but my sister said it looked more like a particular hair. for being screamed at in her face by a random guy, she was rather nonplussed about the whole thing. As we were leaving the car, our mother caught sight of the same guy having an argument with another man. My sister and I both looked, and we got to bear witness as he climbed on top of a car and started stripping. Needless to say, we didn't stay there long after that. My friend and I decided to go on a late-night drive to find this creepy cemetery one night. Great start to a story, I know, but we were bored and in a small town with nothing else to do. After about 40 minutes of driving, we got to the state park. Now, typically, parks are closed after dark, but these roads were still public access, so they weren't off limits to general drivers. However, we were the only ones on the road at this point, and it was isolated, we thought. The lanes were surrounded by thick trees and it was dark. No street lights, kind of dark. We were on a narrow dirt lane looking for this cemetery, but we drive by it unknowingly. The area we were driving through was kind of like a square of roads with only one way in and out. We get to the crossroads, where the road we are on goes straight through, or you can continue back through by a left turn only. Next to the ditch across the road from us, we see a dark green sedan pull into the brush. No lights on, no people around. Not an accident from all we could tell. Whatever, kind of weird. But we slowly turn left and begin the loop back around looking for the small rows of old headstones again. As we get back around to the intersection about 5 minutes away, the green sedan is still pulled off in the bushes, but now it's not only the vehicle there. There's a big pickup truck idling in the dark across from us, blocking the straightaway. Now, it had to have come from the other direction since no cars passed us or were in front or behind us. That was the way we had planned to go, to leave the park since we hadn't found what we had been looking for, but we couldn't pass through. This truck was in the middle of the road, taking up all the space on either side. At first, we were thinking this guy probably got his car stuck and called for help. Then, this truck guy turns on his headlights, actually his high beams, and begins revving his engine hard. My friend and I exchange looks, like wonder who's overcompensating for something. And when we turn back trying to see through the blinding lights, we see a silhouette of a big, bulky man standing in front of the truck, hands on hips just standing there. We aren't but a car's length and a half away from this guy, and there's nowhere left to go, which we know just leads us back around to the same place. We sit there staring at each other for a few moments trying to decide what to do. My friend starts pulling the car forward at snail pace, trying to keep as much distance between us and this truck as possible, and we make it turn left. He's just standing there not moving, just looking in our direction. We weren't scared yet really, but I'm a bit paranoid generally, so I was waiting for him to lunge at the car, throw something at us or something. I don't know, it just really felt off. After we turn, I check the rear view and see the guy holding something as he takes a few steps behind our car in the outline of the light. It's long, barrel-shaped, and threatening looking. We peel out of there now, wanting to put distance between us, but forgetting we are stuck in this square of roads. When we get back to about halfway between the start of the straightaway and the truck, whose headlights we can still see, we pull off to the side of the road, trying to figure out how to get out of this situation. I look out the window and see that we are sitting right next to the cemetery we had been looking for, but we are both too freaked out to get out, and we laugh at the irony for a second. Then we see headlights coming from behind us. Oh crap. It's the guy, we think. As it gets closer, we see it's a white SUV, and it slows next to our car. The windows roll down and it's a car full of guys our age. "What are you guys up to out here?" the driver says. We say that we're just out for a drive, and they say some things we can't hear to each other. My friends and I don't have a strong menacing aura, so we hoped we could just send some chill vibes and have them leave us off the hook for whatever was going on. Were they in with the truck guy? 'Cause this wasn't truck guy, but this just all seemed too weird. We asked if they'd seen a truck up ahead, where they had driven by, but they said that they hadn't. When we looked back, we noticed the lights coming from the oncoming direction were gone. They laughed and pulled away slowly, telling us to have a good night, and we pulled back onto the road to take off for the exit, only looking out the windows for long enough to notice that the sedan was still there. We made it back to his parents' house without further incident and told them about this strange encounter, but couldn't really explain what had happened. It still sounds kind of stupid when I talk about it, but something was going on. Still, it could have just been a guy out fixing a car late at night, but why the aggressive behavior? And who were the people in the SUV? And why did they suddenly appear? I'm just glad nothing worse happened. I avoid state parks at night, but my friend, he's still a maniac camping in the woods alone, and he's seen some stuff. I grew up in the suburbs of Charlotte, North Carolina. My parents bought a house from the 70s complete with colourful toilets, pink and periwinkle, and lots of vibrant wallpaper. The house was not open concept in the slightest, with 4 doors to the outside, 2 staircases, and with many easy storage places and walls one could hide behind without someone in the next room having any idea where they were. The house has always creeped me out, even though we now have normal white toilets. One day my brother and I left for school and my dad left for work, leaving my mum alone to get ready for work. While in the kitchen she heard the electric pencil sharpener going off upstairs, as if someone was sharpening a pencil, on and off repeatedly for several minutes. She hauled ass out the house and called the sheriff to investigate. The sheriff walked through the entire house, checking every little crevice behind every wall for signs of an intruder. When he got to the office, he noticed the storage closet that was never used was wide open, and there were the freshly sharpened pencils sitting on the desk. He couldn't explain what he saw, but it would be extremely easy for someone to slip in and out of one of the various entrances without anyone knowing. Things got even weirder when a few days later, my mum and I found another perfectly sharpened pencil in the passenger seat of her car. This all happened 11 years ago, and the weird pencil finding stopped there. But we are still convinced someone was stalking my mum, and we have dubbed this person the Pencil Man, and blame him whenever something goes missing or isn't where it should be. Many people may think that the following story isn't true, but I've got my best friend as a witness. The following events happened. This was a few years ago when I was 13. I'm 5'7", weigh about 125 pounds, so I'm on the small side, but usually carry pepper spray and another form of protection with me. I'm embarrassed to say though, in the excitement of exploration with my best friend, I forgot both of these things. I love to explore and travel, especially in places I'm not allowed. So when I moved in, of course, one of the first places I explored were the train tracks. So I had my best friend come over one day to explore the neighborhood with me, and we decided the train tracks were a perfect place to explore. We were walking for an hour or two, but it was still light outside, and we had passed a small neighborhood street, and we felt safe enough. But when I turned around to throw a stick, I saw 5 hooded figures following us about 200 feet away. I tried to pretend I hadn't seen them and calmly told my best friend. We decided to look at them straight on and see what they would do. Once we looked at them, they stopped. So did my friend and I, and we stared at each other for a few seconds. Finally, they made their move. 3 of them went left and 2 of them went right. We heard the sound of loud and fast footsteps, so we finally snapped out of our trance and ran as quickly as we could. We were both cross-country runners, and were being held together by adrenaline, so we were going as fast as we had ever gone. Because I had explored on those same tracks alone a few days ago, I knew that if we ran about half a mile more, we would be on a bridge above another small neighborhood, and we somehow made it. We weren't sure if we were still being followed or not, but out of fear we jumped 10 feet down and kept running deep into the neighborhood until we finally saw other people. Then slowly we walked home, shaking and exhausted. Looking back now, I regret not telling my parents, but I was scared they wouldn't let me go out exploring anymore, and I never went back on those train tracks again. For background, my family moved to the countryside from the city when I was about 7, and I'm 21 now. Both my parents had grown up in the suburbs and had lived in the capital of our state for about 10 years before we moved. It definitely took us some time to get used to the train tracks that ran by our house, the wild animals, the weird but kind neighbors, and the odd visitors. Another thing is that you have to get off the main road and turn onto a long gravel driveway to get to our house. We can see the entire length of driveway from certain points in our yard, which is about 3 acres. A few years after we moved, my dad got a promotion at work, and as a result started to get conferences and business trips that lasted from a few days to weeks, at least a few times a year. My mum felt very nervous about being home alone with 2 young kids. I was 10 and my brother was 6, so we decided to get a dog. We knew we wanted a big dog, but something that would be gentle with my brother and I. After a few weeks at looking at shelters, we took home Rocky. He was 9 months when we took him home, and already pushing 70 pounds. We believe he's a German Shepherd mixed with some northern or mountain breed. We aren't sure to this day, but he's a massive red-colored dog with a long black muzzle and ears, a fluffy tail that he carries over his back, and a white stripe up his nose. It wasn't long until he was 100 pounds and an absolute force to be reckoned with. Even though he was very gentle with both my brother and I, loved our cats and was a big ball of joy to be around anyone we brought into the house, he tended to be very territorial and aggressive with other dogs and very protective of us, especially of my mum and I. Once the electric company came to do work on the telephone poles on our property without telling us first, and after 20 minutes they finally had to call us because Rocky had trapped them in their truck and was jumping up and barking at their window. I doubt he would have really attacked them if they'd have left their trucks, but it was more than enough to make them think twice. This protective instinct came in very, very handy one day. It was summertime, my dad was at work, and my mum was home with my brother and I since she was a teacher and off for the summer with us. My mum was working in our garden, and my brother and I were playing close by with Rocky watching over all of us. Rocky all of a sudden sounded the alarm, throwing his head up in the air and barking as he makes a deep woo-woo noise. I looked up to see a dirty white pickup truck off the main road into our driveway. This wasn't necessarily alarming at first, as people sometimes used our driveway to turn around when they got lost. But the white pickup slowly ambled up our drive, and I could see something strange in the bed. It was lumpy and discolored, but I couldn't really tell what it was until he pulled all the way up to our house, where our other cars were, and honked the horn to get our attention. It was meat. Giant red chunks of meat with some limbs of various animals still attached. It was the creepiest thing I'd ever seen in my life. Just a grizzled, scraggly man in his early 50s driving a pickup truck full of meat in the southern July heat. I immediately just got a really bad vibe from the guy, and I remember my mum telling my brother and I to go inside, and we did, but watched out the glass door. Rocky had surprisingly been quiet at that point, but was now next to my mum, and she had her hands around his collar. The guy rolled down the window and asked my mum if she wanted to purchase some quality meat. My mum said no, and to never visit our property again. Instead, he went on about the different types of meat and asking how much we wanted: beef, venison, pork, etc. My mum asked him to leave again, but instead he decided to get out of the nasty white pickup. As soon as his feet touched the ground, Rocky went ballistic, barking and snarling. This finally made the guy stop. He looked at Rocky, looked at my mum and asked, "Does your dog bite?" My mum, deathly serious, replied, "Only if I tell him to." The guy took one more look at Rocky, and I'm guessing decided not to mess with the giant snarling beast, got into his truck, backed up, and headed back down our driveway. I don't know if he was just trying to sell the meat or what, but apparently he'd been around to our neighbors who also had just gotten a really bad vibe from him. We'll never know what he was really doing with those giant slabs of meat in the bed of his pickup truck. Maybe he was just a weird guy out to sell some sketchy meat. Maybe he was looking for something else, but we never saw the meat man again. Rocky is still kicking it, by the way. He's almost 15 and completely deaf, but he's still out on the yard on summer days, watching over us. My best friend and I went to see Star Wars Episode 7 with her cute brother. They were super close and eventually we got to all hanging out as much as we could. We were all dressed up tastefully as grown adults. My bestie toted a Jedi look. Her brother pulled off a solid Han Solo. And I pulled off a close and well done Rey, minus the hair. None of us broke bank. We went to the theatre and had a blast. It was the first or second night of showing, so it was slammed, and we probably got out just before midnight. I carpooled back to my bestie's apartment where I took my car to go home, as I live about 20 minutes from her place. It was about 1:15 midnight when it happened. I was about 5 minutes from her house when, within a split second of registering, a white blob came from nowhere and slammed into my windshield. Whatever it was splashed across the entire windshield because it was so large. For some reason the lights were off for that section of the street, the only real lighting offered by the vibrant gas station lighting a minute back. Shaken up, I couldn't see through my windshield, but I was afraid to stop, and I couldn't see to turn around and get to the well-lit gas station. The best option I had was to crawl slowly and prayed I hit nothing. I was coming up to a cement median, so I used that as a guide through my driver window. The windshield wiped enough after a solid minute or two of running the wipers continuously. I hit the red stoplight at the end of the strip, where I promptly texted my bestie that I'd been hit by something that impacted my vision, where she promptly offered to send her brother right away. The white stuff was cleared off my windshield significantly better, so I was okay driving home. Because of where I was and the fact the light was out, there were no cameras. I didn't think of calling the police, or that it could have done any good. When the blob came out of nowhere, I couldn't remember if I was by any vehicles or not. I was so tired from spending the day with them and getting out of that movie late, to where I still don't know half of what happened. I know it took a few weeks for some of those spots to wash off the glass. I told my mum in the morning, who freaked out and told me that I should have called the cops. Apparently, when the windshield fluid was cleaning the white stuff off my window, it actually made it worse. This was an ongoing trend for gang initiations, to do things like this to victims. I called them and logged a report, and roughly when it happened, but never heard from them again. Another tactic was laced paper with narcotics that make you pass out from touching it. In any case, I learnt my lesson. Always call the police when something weird happens to you. Oh, and if you get hit with white stuff, do not use the windshield fluid on it. This happened some years ago, when I had the iPhone 4S. I was laying in bed when I received a phone call. I forget who exactly it was or what exactly they claimed to be offering, but it was very obviously a scam of some sort. Well, not obviously enough. This lady was asking me for various details of personal information, which I was giving for some reason. I believe I've read about how people are willing to give up all sorts of information as long as they are asked by someone with the illusion of power or something like that. I was readily handing out my name, email address, confirming my phone number, and it wasn't until she asked for my home address that my common sense kicked in. I didn't need this lady or anyone affiliated with her making house calls, or even so much as sending me garbage mail. "Why do you need my address?" I asked. "So I can process you," she replied. It sounded reasonable. It even made sense, assuming she was claiming to be doing whatever it was legitimately. But I no longer had the blind faith to hand out any information in hopes that it was. My exact location was pretty much the last detail I was still hanging on to, and I had now decided not to relinquish it. Nothing too creepy had happened yet. Obviously, just politely I declined and hung up. Well, that was where I ran into trouble. Now she was literally using my name every time she said something to me. After I said nothing to her last statement, she repeats, "Can I have your address, please, Sakura?" I say nothing, take my phone away from my head and tap the end call button on screen, but nothing happens. The touch screen is now completely unresponsive. I am unable to end my call. I vaguely know how easy it would have been not too long previously had I kept my cool as hell Motorola Razr. Still not saying anything, I hold the lock button until the slide to power off option appears. Of course, my touchscreen is still unresponsive, so this was not a solution after all. Thinking back on it now, I could have just kept holding the lock screen button until the phone would have force powered off. But I guess I wasn't aware of that feature at the time. I had experienced this stupid unresponsive touchscreen issue before and during phone calls. This wasn't the first time I was unable to end phone calls on my own, but I knew that once the call was ended by the other person, the touchscreen functionality would return. But typically the person I'm talking to isn't completely intent on keeping me on there until I relinquish all my secrets. I continued to say nothing. Not only had I decided to not give up my address, but I wasn't even going to give away any more of my voice. So I lay the phone on my bed near me and buried my head in the pillow, waiting for her to give up and end the call. But she didn't. I could still hear her a short distance away. "Give me your address, Sakura." I ignored her and stayed laying there. "What is your address, Sakura?" I've been silent for a while now. Any normal person would have likely given up on the conversation, but not this she-witch. She still repeated her question, and I searched my brain for a solution. I found one. It's a fairly last resort. I take a trick from my experience jailbreaking my iDevice. I seize my phone, which is still transmitting, an attempt to ascertain my location, and hold the lock and home button until my phone is put in DFU mode. This essentially bricks it temporarily. I guess you put your phone in this mode when you are recovering your device, as well as for some jailbreaks. Finally, my link to this woman was severed. I brought my phone back from the DFU mode, and everything was fine after that. I wondered if she somehow had the ability to disable ending the phone call. I now figure it was just a coincidence that the unresponsive touchscreen glitch happened during the call. That's about it though. It was just a really creepy situation to be in, laying there in the dark, being unable to hang up on her, and her repeating the need for my address over and over. I never got another phone call about it, never so much as an email. Maybe it wasn't a scam and I missed the chance of a lifetime. However, judging by her willingness to talk to thin air for a few minutes, I doubt it. I'm going to take you back to the 1st of October 2019. I'm getting on a train to head home on the afternoon, and the train is nearly full, and probably a few minutes after getting into my seat, a young woman about my age in her early 20s sits next to me, probably due to a lack of space. For the first 30 minutes it's uneventful, with no interaction between us. An elderly couple gets on the train, and she offers up her seat. I offer to do the same so they can both sit together, and the elderly couple thank us for the offer but decline and sit on the stairs. It's a large double-decker train, you see. I get up to go to the bathroom and return a minute later. She has moved to the window seat where I sat and offered it back to me. I said it wasn't necessary, but she moved back to her original spot anyway, and I moved back onto the window seat. She then uses this as a pretense, I think, to start a conversation with me, and complimenting me about my willingness to give up my seat. We then begin to talk about our respective days. Innocuous enough. I was at a conference/convention for my job, and she was heading out to visit family. Claims to have lived in the area in the past. Now, she ends up asking where I'm getting off. I tell her. She says she's also getting off there, and asks how long until we arrive. I give her my guess and tell her I usually don't catch a train myself, so it may not be perfect. We keep talking about relatively innocent stuff. We exchange names. I won't mention names out of respect for her identity regardless. And she eventually asked me where I worked, and I told her that I worked as a computer technician at a school. I told her it was a Catholic school, as an important detail to my role. With that, she uses that as a pretense to talk about religion, and asks if I participate in any religious functions at the school, and tell her that no, I don't actively participate in them, and tell her that I'm religiously agnostic. But I also mention I was raised Catholic and went to a Catholic secondary school. She then claims to have been an agnostic herself a few years ago until she found Jesus and let him into her heart, which she claims helped her a lot with her mental health issues that she was having, as I myself suffer from some conditions. At this point, I'm just curious about her story. I will generally humor anyone, then I like to hear people's experiences and point of views as long as it's not directly hostile to a group of people. I listen to her harp on about it while she asks me the occasional question about me, like what worries me about life in general, and during this time she gives me a pamphlet, and we continue discussing seemingly innocent conversation about religion until I have to interrupt her as we approach the station we were meant to get off at. She asks to do a prayer on the bottom left image on the front pamphlet, and I oblige her and do it partially out of curiosity as I haven't done one in a long time. Before we part ways, she asks for my email. I tell her and she punches it into her phone. We then hug and part ways, and a few days later I receive an email basically asking how I was and if I'd read the pamphlet and all the other stuff. After a little digging on the web, I noticed that the website linked in the pamphlet, activated.org, the one that was in the email as well, is affiliated with the Family International, a religious cult that is into some shady stuff. I was just in disbelief and shocked. I'm questioning on whether to reply to her email and quiz her about it. If I do, well, I'm kind of scared. But holy hell, she tried to recruit me into a crazy cult, and I hope I won't cross paths with her again. Where I work, it's hard to avoid people. My job is to document everyone else's work by taking photos, so a lot of people know me generally as the blonde photo girl. While shooting an event a few months ago, I found myself talking to a group of people about hobbies. I, being the anime trash that I am, mentioned conventions. This one small creepy stashed dude got all excited and said he's going to Comic-Con. I thought he was talking about the official ones, so I asked NYC or San Diego. He said some random town in Ohio. And I said, well, it's probably not an official Comic-Con. And he got really flustered about this and proceeded to follow me around, just saying over and over, it's a real Comic-Con. At this point, I'm annoyed as hell. I'm getting the vibes that 1, he's a creep, and 2, he's just using this as an excuse to follow me around. I tell him, hey, this conversation was over when I walked away. Why are you still hung up on it? He looked so butthurt, and he said, but it was Comic-Con. Cue earlier this week. During a break, a friend and I did a little PS Vita game trading. When we were wrapping things up, I noticed the same freaking kid at another table watching. I barely think of it, and stand up and say bye to my friend. That kid had stood up too, and walked slowly to the vending machines which I had to pass by to get to my workspace. By the time I was nearing him, he was idly standing in front of a machine, just glancing at me in the machine, not moving to buy anything either. I thought, oh great, let me guess he's gonna follow me. And I tested this by going to the store past the vending machine and down some stairs. Lo and behold, 5 seconds later he's following. And since there are no jackets allowed in store, I set this empty soda can down that I had from earlier on the ground so that I can take off my coat. He meagerly offers, I think they have a garbage bag in the store, and I reply with a little attitude, duh, there's a trash can in there. And here's where I finally decide to vent, and tell him how creepy it was that he'd followed me. I didn't follow you, he says with the guiltiest look on his face. I shut him down, and I was like, yeah, sure, I'm gonna go now. That was the last thing I said, and then I was done with that guy. I really hope he doesn't decide to pester me anymore. Creep.